Awaken your spirit chosen ones. The longest investigations are rarely about truth. They're about someone refusing to accept reality. 8 years, not 8 weeks, not a phase, not a misunderstanding that cleared up after one serious conversation and an awkward handshake. 8 full years of watching, whispering, checking, rechecking, waiting for a mistake that never came. That's not justice. That's obsession dressed up as responsibility, wearing a badge it never earned. Here's a fact most people don't like admitting. When an inquiry drags on without results, it usually means the conclusion was decided first and the evidence was supposed to catch up later. In psychology, this is called confirmation bias. In real life, it looks like grown adults burning time, energy, and credibility just to avoid saying one uncomfortable sentence: "We were wrong." And instead of owning that, they keep digging, hoping reality eventually cooperates. Spoiler alert, it rarely does. What makes this story unsettling isn't the time wasted, but the confidence with which nothing was found. Files thickened, stories evolved, the tone got more serious, the faces got more concerned. All while the truth sat there, unmoved, unimpressed, and very much innocent. Imagine putting your life on pause for nearly a decade only to discover the villain never existed. That's not a plot twist. That's a self-inflicted plot hole. There's also something quietly absurd about the whole thing. 8 years of surveillance, analysis, and side-eye for someone who didn't even break the rules. That's like tailing a parked car because it looked like it might speed. At some point, the problem isn't the subject, it's the watcher. And that's where this topic really lives. Not in what was done, but in what wasn't. Not in guilt, but in projection. This is about how people can spend years hunting for a crime simply because accepting innocence would force them to confront their own fear, ego, or wasted effort. Stay with me, because once you see how this happens, you'll never look at long grudges, endless investigations, or drawn-out accusations the same way again. Number 1, they weren't hunting a crime, they were hunting a contradiction. What really unsettles people isn't wrongdoing. It's someone who exists outside their mental filing system. A person who doesn't match the labels, the expectations, the quiet rules everyone else agreed to without realizing they agreed. When you don't fit cleanly into the story people tell themselves about how life works, you become suspicious by default. Not because you did something wrong, but because your presence exposes how fragile their logic is. They needed you to make sense in a way that was convenient to them. When you didn't, they assumed something must be hidden. That assumption turned into scrutiny. Scrutiny turned into fixation. Over time, the goal quietly shifted. It stopped being about finding facts and became about resolving the discomfort you caused simply by being you. You contradicted their beliefs about effort, success, hierarchy, fairness, or control, and that contradiction felt personal. The truth is, many people build their identity on invisible agreements. If you follow the rules, you get the rewards. If you struggle, it must be your fault. If someone moves differently and still stands strong, the whole structure starts to wobble. Rather than question the structure, they question the person. It's safer to suspect you than to admit their worldview has holes. That's why the hunt drags on without results. They're not actually looking for evidence, they're looking for relief. Relief from the tension you create by existing without explanation. Every year that passes without finding fault only deepens the need to keep looking, because stopping would mean accepting a painful possibility, that nothing was wrong with you at all, and accepting that would force them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, about choices they made, risks they avoided, rules they followed that maybe didn't deserve obedience. So instead, they keep circling, hoping time will magically turn contradiction into guilt. But contradiction doesn't decay. It doesn't confess. It just stands there, quietly consistent. And that's what makes it unbearable. You weren't a mystery to be solved. You were a mirror they didn't want to look into, so they tried to break it instead. Number 2. 8 years of obsession usually hides one unspoken fear. What if I'm the problem? Obsession doesn't start loud. It starts as a small itch people can't stop scratching, a thought they refuse to sit with, a doubt they keep pushing away. Over time, that doubt grows teeth. Instead of turning inward and asking hard questions, they turn outward and fix their attention on someone else. You became the perfect distraction from a truth they were terrified to face. Admitting, "I might be the problem," is one of the hardest things an adult can do. It threatens ego, identity, and the carefully arranged story they tell themselves about their life. So rather than confront their own choices, mistakes, or missed chances, they shift the spotlight. If you're at fault, they don't have to look at themselves. If you're guilty, they stay innocent by comparison. 8 years isn't commitment. It's avoidance stretched over time. Each year they kept going wasn't proof of certainty. It was proof of fear. Stopping would mean standing still long enough for uncomfortable thoughts to catch up. Thoughts like, maybe they misjudged you, maybe they overreacted, maybe they invested too much energy in the wrong direction, and once those thoughts show up, there's no easy exit. So they double down. They convince themselves that persistence equals righteousness. That effort automatically means truth. The longer they chase, the harder it becomes to admit there was nothing there in the first place. Walking away would feel like confessing not just a mistake, but years of wasted focus. What makes this especially cruel is how convincing it looks from the outside. Obsession can masquerade as responsibility, concern, or vigilance. It sounds noble. It looks serious. But underneath, it's still fear. Fear of self-reflection. Fear of accountability, fear of discovering that the enemy was never external. Meanwhile, you stand there, unknowingly carrying the weight of their unresolved issues. Their frustration, regret, and insecurity get quietly assigned to your name. You become the symbol of everything that didn't work out for them. Not because you caused it, but because you survived it. In the end, the hunt says more about the hunter than the hunted. 8 years later, the real question was never about your innocence. It was about whether they were brave enough to face themselves. Number 3, you became the folder where they dumped everything they refused to process. Humans are experts at outsourcing responsibility, especially the emotional kind. Pain, guilt, shame, regret, and fear have a way of accumulating, and most people don't want to look at the pile. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. It might even make them question who they are. So instead of handling it themselves, they find someone else to carry it for them. In your case, you became that folder. You weren't guilty of anything, yet somehow you absorbed the weight of every thought they refused to confront. Every suspicious glance, every whispered accusation, every late-night investigation wasn't really about you. It was a way for them to avoid opening the drawer labeled "My Own Mistakes." You were convenient. You had presence. You had stability. And in a world where they refused to face their own instability, you became the container for everything they didn't want to sit with. The dangerous part is how invisible this becomes to the person carrying the burden. They convince themselves it's about justice, truth, or protection. In reality, it's pure projection. Their unresolved issues, whether fear of failure, anger at life, jealousy of progress, quietly ride on your back while you remain bewildered by the intensity of their focus. The longer it goes on, the heavier it feels, because they keep stacking on more of their unprocessed chaos, believing it's legitimate concern. You're not a villain. You're not even a participant in their drama. yet you're treated as the main character. And the cruel irony is that the folder can't fight back without being accused of arrogance, defensiveness, or guilt. The moment you resist, you validate their projection. The moment you comply, you carry more than you ever signed up for. By the end, the whole exercise is revealed for what it truly is, a way for someone to avoid themselves. They built a narrative around you, not because you fit it, but because it was easier than facing the truth of their own life. And once you see it that way, the obsession stops being intimidating and becomes almost absurd, a reflection of someone else's unresolved chaos, mistakenly turned into your problem. Number 4, they needed you to be guilty so their life could stay innocent. There's a strange comfort in blaming someone else. It makes life neat. It gives structure to chaos. It allows people to avoid staring into the mirror and asking the uncomfortable question, what if I'm wrong? In this case, your innocence was the real threat. If you were truly clean, their story, the narrative that justified their decisions, their frustrations, their obsession, would collapse. And the thought of that collapse was unbearable. People like that don't just want evidence, they want validation. They need proof that their anger, their suspicion, their relentless pursuit is meaningful. Without guilt, all of that effort becomes a mirror reflecting only themselves. And they are not ready to see that reflection. So they hunt, they accuse, they dig, not because of what you did, but because of what your existence challenges, the illusion of their own moral and intellectual superiority. This is why obsession often outlasts reason. Every claim against you, every imagined misstep, every rumor they chase is less about the truth and more about preserving a narrative that lets them sleep at night. They can convince themselves that they are vigilant, just, careful, responsible. But in reality, they are terrified that stopping, stepping back, or admitting error would strip away the protective layer of self-righteousness. Your innocence threatens that layer. And here's the quiet cruelty of it. The more innocent you are, the more absurd their hunt becomes, and the harder it is for them to stop. If they admit you did nothing wrong, they must admit that years of their life were spent obsessing over a ghost of their own making. That's a kind of reckoning most people avoid at all costs. So they keep going, they chase shadows, they interrogate reality itself, and through it all, they disguise fear and ego as diligence. Meanwhile, you exist, unshaken and untouched, quietly exposing the ridiculousness of their obsession. The irony is brutal. Your innocence, something they wish were weakness, becomes the weight they can never bear. Number 5, long investigations often mean there was never real evidence to begin with. When someone spends years chasing a person for a supposed crime that never happened, it's tempting to assume there's some hidden proof, some smoking gun they're just not finding. The truth is far more revealing. When the evidence is absent, obsession fills the gap. People refuse to admit there's nothing to find, so they fabricate reasons, reinterpret harmless actions, and twist coincidences until the emptiness feels meaningful. The longer it goes on, the less about truth it becomes, and the more about preserving their own story. The irony is sharp. Investigations are supposed to clarify reality, but in these cases they actually obscure it. Every step forward, every phone call, every file examined becomes less about uncovering facts and more about justifying the hunt itself. They convince themselves that persistence equals progress, that volume can replace substance. 8 years of searching, checking, questioning, all of it masquerading as diligence, when in reality it's a desperate attempt to manufacture something that was never there. This isn't just about inefficiency or obsession, it's about projection. They don't want to admit the absence of evidence because that absence forces a confrontation with their own misjudgment. If nothing proves guilt, The only conclusion left is that they were wrong, and that conclusion is heavy. It undermines their confidence, their authority, their sense of purpose. So instead they continue, piling time and energy onto a hollow premise, hoping that if they dig deep enough, meaning will appear. Meanwhile, the person being hunted becomes almost mythical in their mind. You aren't guilty, but your very innocence is reframed as cleverness, manipulation, or hidden intent. Every ordinary choice is scrutinized as though it were a confession in disguise. Every calm response is read as a smokescreen. The reality that nothing happened, nothing was broken, nothing was owed, that truth becomes invisible. In the end, long investigations often reveal more about the hunters than the hunted. The obsession, the projections, the wasted years, all of it is a mirror reflecting fear, ego, and insecurity. The evidence wasn't missing because it was hidden. It was missing because it never existed. And that is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Number 6, they chased you because you moved without asking permission. Most people live life like it comes with an invisible instruction manual, and anyone who ignores the manual instantly becomes suspicious. Rules aren't always written down, but they are agreed upon silently, enforced unconsciously, and obeyed almost instinctively. When you act freely without seeking validation or following the invisible protocols, it doesn't just catch attention, it threatens it. That's why they fixated on you, not because you did something wrong, but because you refused to ask for permission to exist on your own terms. To them, your independence looked like defiance. Your choices, your timing, your calm confidence, all of it was interpreted as arrogance or guilt. You didn't fit into their neat categories of control, so they assumed there had to be something to catch. They couldn't tolerate the idea that someone could move, succeed, or live without reference to their approval. It's easier to hunt than to accept that the world contains people who aren't waiting for permission slips. This is the subtle cruelty of it. You weren't making waves. You weren't doing anything extraordinary in the literal sense. You were just existing as yourself, operating on your own logic, following your own rhythm. But to people bound by the unspoken rules, your self-determination becomes a threat. It forces them to confront a part of themselves they prefer to ignore. The part that obeys out of fear, the part that doubts, the part that avoids risk at all costs. So they chase, they accuse, they scrutinize. Every action of yours is reinterpreted, reframed, and questioned because it dared to exist without permission. And while they are busy policing your freedom, they fail to notice the most important thing. Nothing about your life required their approval. Your choices weren't rebellion, they were just reality. And the irony is savage. The more they try to contain you, the more obvious it becomes that your life isn't theirs to control. In the end, their obsession says less about what you did and more about what they can't stand. That someone can move forward, unbound, untethered, and completely indifferent to their authority. Number 7, the hunt wasn't about stopping you. It was about slowing themselves down. Most people assume that when someone obsesses over another, the goal is control or punishment. In reality, the fixation often reveals more about the hunter than the hunted. Chasing you for 8 years wasn't really about what you did or didn't do. It was about giving themselves a purpose, a direction, a reason to keep moving while their own lives felt stagnant. The longer they focused on you, the less they had to confront the fact that their own time was slipping away, their own choices were limited, and their own potential was being wasted. By keeping their attention locked on you, they created an illusion of productivity. Every phone call, every file, every whispered suspicion was a substitute for the self-reflection they refused to do. They could feel busy, vigilant, in control, while their personal progress quietly froze. Watching you, analyzing you, obsessing over every move became a way to hide from their own inaction. In short, you became a tool, an anchor, and a distraction all at once. This is why obsession can look so convincing. To outsiders, it appears serious, righteous, almost noble. But underneath, it's always insecurity dressed up as duty. They didn't need to catch you, because catching you would have forced them to finish. They didn't need evidence, because the act of hunting itself justified their existence. The longer the chase went on, the more comfortable they were avoiding the uncomfortable truth, that their own life lacked direction, meaning, and courage. Meanwhile, your life carried on quietly, unaffected by their obsession. Every day you moved, learned, and grew without checking if you had permission or approval. You didn't slow down because you weren't invested in their narrative. And that contrast, their frantic energy versus your calm progress, probably fueled their fixation even more. The cruel irony is unavoidable. They thought they were pursuing a target, but the target never needed pursuit. You weren't the problem they needed to solve. You were the mirror showing just how far behind they had fallen and how unwilling they were to catch up with themselves. Number 8, they mistook your resilience for arrogance. Resilience has a quiet way of confusing people who are used to chaos, manipulation, or control. When someone doesn't buckle under pressure, doesn't overreact, and doesn't play the expected game, it often reads as defiance to the untrained eye. In the case of an 8-year hunt, your ability to stay calm, composed, and unshakable was never interpreted for what it was, inner strength. Instead, they labeled it as arrogance, as if your lack of fear or panic was an insult to them personally. People obsessed with control are allergic to resilience. They can handle mistakes, misunderstandings, and even rebellion if it fits their expectations. But when someone withstands pressure effortlessly, when accusations and scrutiny slide off without leaving cracks, it throws them into confusion. They want you to break, to respond the way their narrative demands. When you don't, they assume it's because you feel superior, because you're above them in some imagined hierarchy. In truth, it's not superiority. It's endurance. It's quiet confidence. It's knowing who you are, independent of their projections. This misinterpretation fuels obsession. Every time you stay calm in the face of scrutiny, every time you refuse to justify yourself unnecessarily, every time you continue living your life without apology, it challenges their ego. They begin to spin stories, invent motives, and create evidence in their mind just to explain why someone could possibly withstand scrutiny without flinching. Your strength becomes their problem because they can't comprehend that resilience doesn't require explanation. The irony is brutal. Your survival and composure, the very things that allow you to move through life with clarity, are the things that make them spiral. They are so focused on what they believe is arrogance that they fail to see the truth, that you are untouchable, not because of ego, but because you refuse to surrender your inner stability. Your calm isn't a challenge to them. It's a reflection of reality, and they are desperate enough to call it arrogance rather than admit they are powerless to shake it. In the end, resilience is misunderstood, feared, and often attacked, but it is also untouchable. No amount of obsession can break something that isn't brittle to begin with. Number 9, 8 years is not persistence. It's denial wearing discipline's clothes. When someone spends nearly a decade hunting another person for something that never happened, it might look like dedication from the outside. But real persistence is purposeful, measured, and guided by truth. What this really is denial masquerading as discipline. They've convinced themselves that relentless effort equals legitimacy, that time spent equals results, and that obsession equals righteousness. None of it is true. They aren't disciplined. They are trapped in a story they refuse to rewrite. The first years probably started with doubt. Maybe they wanted evidence. Maybe they had suspicions. Maybe they genuinely thought something was amiss. But as time went on and nothing concrete emerged, Logic demanded a pause, a re-evaluation, a reality check. Instead, they doubled down. Each day without evidence became proof in their mind that more digging was needed, not that the premise was wrong. Denial grows like a vine. It twists reasoning, strangles clarity, and convinces people that chaos is control. This is what makes the obsession so tragic and absurd. They are grinding through life, investing energy, time, and focus into chasing a phantom, while ignoring the very real consequences of their own choices. Their identity becomes wrapped in the act of hunting, not in achieving or learning. Their discipline is a performance, a shield that keeps them from admitting that they wasted years on a mirage. Meanwhile, the person they are hunting moves through life unaffected, unaware of the futility. Each calm step forward contrasts sharply with the frantic, misguided energy expended on them. That contrast is what feeds the obsession, because deep down, the hunter senses the truth. All that effort isn't moving the target. It's only moving them further away from reality, further from self-awareness, and further from peace. In the end, 8 years of hunting proves nothing about the hunted. It only proves one thing about the hunter. Persistence is meaningless when it is divorced from truth. Denial dressed as discipline will never create results. It only creates regret, absurdity, and the quiet realization that the real cost was never yours. It was theirs. Number 10, they believed if they stared long enough, you would confess to a lie they invented. Obsession has a way of twisting reality until the impossible seems inevitable. In this case, the hunters weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for confirmation of the story they had already written in their minds. They convinced themselves that if they scrutinized every move, examined every word, and waited long enough, you would eventually crumble under the weight of a crime you never committed. It's a mindset built on the illusion that persistence can rewrite reality. This belief reveals something deeply human and deeply flawed. When people are desperate to justify themselves, they start treating imagination as evidence. They interpret calm as guilt, independence as defiance, and innocence as cunning. Every ordinary action becomes suspicious. Every explanation seems rehearsed. Every silence is a confession in disguise. The longer the hunt goes on, the more they rely on hope over fact, on fear over reason. In their eyes, the truth isn't enough. It must bend to satisfy their obsession. It's also a form of psychological projection. They assume that because they would eventually break under scrutiny, so must everyone else. They don't see that people can endure pressure without guilt. They don't see that innocence doesn't need a confession. Their whole hunt depends on a lie they want to be real, that your calm, your consistency, your freedom to live is a mask hiding wrongdoing. Meanwhile, you continue to live your life, unaffected by their narrative. You don't confess because there's nothing to confess. You don't break because their obsession cannot touch what isn't theirs to touch. And that fact, the quiet indifference of reality, is the sharpest blow to their ego. Every day they spend staring, waiting, and scrutinizing is another day they fail to produce what they so desperately crave. Proof that they were right. In the end, the tragedy isn't that they hunted you, it's that they hunted a shadow of their own making. They created a crime in their minds, invested years chasing it, and failed to see that the confession they hoped for would never come because it was never supposed to. Reality doesn't bend to obsession, and the truth doesn't apologize for existing. Number 11. Your calm wasn't strategy, it was clarity. People love to believe calm is calculated. They assume silence, restraint, and composure are tactics designed to manipulate outcomes. But real calm doesn't come from strategy. It comes from clarity. It comes from knowing exactly where you stand, what you did, and what you didn't do. When you are clear inside, there's nothing to perform, nothing to prove, and nothing to rehearse. You're not managing impressions, you're simply existing in truth. That's why your calm unsettled them so deeply. They expected panic, defensiveness, over-explaining, or cracks. Those reactions would have made sense to them. Instead, they were met with steadiness. No scrambling, no emotional chaos, just consistency. To people operating from suspicion and fear, clarity looks suspicious because it doesn't follow their emotional script. They mistake peace for calculation because they themselves are always calculating. Your calm wasn't an act of confidence meant to intimidate. It was the natural result of not carrying guilt. Guilt makes people restless. Innocence allows stillness. When there's nothing to hide, there's no urgency to control the narrative. You didn't need to rehearse your truth because your truth wasn't changing. That kind of inner alignment doesn't shout. It doesn't posture. It doesn't rush. And that's precisely why it's misunderstood. The longer the scrutiny went on, the clearer this became. While they grew more frantic, more imaginative, and more desperate to provoke a reaction, you remained grounded. Not because you were winning, but because there was no game to play. They were chasing a version of you that didn't exist, while you were simply living as yourself. That contrast quietly exposed the imbalance. Calm doesn't compete with chaos. It outlasts it. In the end, your clarity became the most frustrating evidence of all. It couldn't be twisted, cornered, or broken down. It didn't offer drama or confession. It just stayed the same. And that's the power of clarity. It doesn't need defense. It doesn't argue. It simply remains, untouched by the noise around it, long after the noise exhausts itself. Number 12. The real shock wasn't that you were innocent. It was that they looked ridiculous. After 8 years of chasing someone for a crime that never happened, the final reveal should have been dramatic, right? Justice served, truth uncovered, lesson learned. But the real punchline wasn't your innocence. It was the absurdity of their obsession. All that time, all that energy, all those whispered accusations and midnight theories, and it led to nothing. The hunter, so certain of their own cleverness, ends up looking foolish, almost comical in the eyes of anyone who sees the truth. That's the part they never prepare for, the mirror reflecting their own ridiculousness. It's easy to get lost in the hunter's perspective, imagining them as powerful, relentless, or fearsome. But obsession without reason is self-defeating. Every surveillance session, every whispered suspicion, every attempt to catch you became a testament to their own inability to face reality. They thought they were crafting a narrative where you fell, but the narrative collapsed on them. Years of effort produced nothing but embarrassment, showing how obsessive behavior can amplify flaws instead of resolving problems. What makes this especially sharp is the contrast. You weren't hiding. You weren't clever or evasive in the traditional sense. You were just living, calm and unaffected. Every ordinary move you made them look even more desperate, more frantic, more absurd. The world watches them, obsessing over shadows, while the truth quietly stands in plain sight. It's the ultimate irony. They aimed to prove something about you, but the only thing proven is how ridiculous obsession can make someone appear. This moment of revelation is brutal because it's not just public embarrassment, it's existential. 8 years of obsession eroded credibility, drained energy, and left a glaring spotlight on the futility of their actions. They spent nearly a decade trying to create guilt where none existed, and in the process, they became the story people tell when cautionary tales are needed. The shock, then, isn't your innocence. It's the humbling, almost laughable lesson that chasing shadows never makes you wise. It just makes you the punchline, and no amount of effort can rewrite that truth. Number 13. When the hunt ended, They were left alone with themselves, and that was the real punishment. After 8 years of relentless chasing, there comes a moment when the obsession runs out of steam. No evidence, no confession, no validation, just silence. And in that silence, the hunters are forced to confront the one thing they avoided all along, themselves. For years, they projected their fears, insecurities, and frustrations onto you, using the hunt as a shield against introspection. But when the chase ends, there's nowhere left to hide. The weight of wasted time, misguided energy, and the choices they refuse to face finally lands squarely on their own shoulders. This is the cruel irony of obsession. They thought they could exhaust someone else, bend reality, or prove a point. Instead, they exhaust themselves. Every plan, every theory, every minute spent scrutinizing your life was a minute stolen from their own. Careers stagnate, relationships fray, and opportunities vanish while they are busy polishing the idea of guilt that never existed. And when it's all over, the emptiness isn't liberating. It's a haunting mirror, reflecting years of misdirected energy and unresolved fear. The loneliness isn't just social, it's existential. They were so invested in defining you as the problem that they neglected to define themselves. Who are you if the obsession disappears? What do you do when the villain you created turns out to be nothing more than a shadow of your own making? That's the punishment that no amount of justification can soften. The confrontation with a self that feels smaller, weaker, and more lost than when the hunt began. Meanwhile, the person who was hunted moves on, free of suspicion, unaffected by years of relentless focus. The contrast is stark, almost vicious in its clarity. You aren't carrying regret or guilt. You didn't invest yourself in the obsession. You remain intact, untouched, and stronger for it. And the hunters are left with only themselves, staring at the absurdity of 8 years wasted on a ghost, forced to reckon with the fact that the real target all along wasn't you. It was their own unwillingness to face their life, their failures, and their truth. In the end, freedom isn't always about escaping blame. Sometimes it's simply surviving when others can't survive themselves. Number 14. The final irony is this. They trained you for pressure while they trained themselves for regret. There's a strange lesson hidden in being hunted for 8 years. Every accusation, every whispered suspicion, every attempt to corner or intimidate you became unintentional training. You didn't ask for it, you didn't plan it, but enduring years of relentless scrutiny forged a resilience most people never experience. You learned patience, clarity, and the quiet strength to exist without apology. You learned to carry yourself through tension without giving it the power to define you. Each time they tried to provoke, manipulate, or control you, you became sharper, steadier, and more self-assured. Meanwhile, the hunters were building nothing but their own regret. Every hour spent tracking you, every minute wasted on speculation, and every ounce of obsession was a brick in a monument to futility. They were training themselves to chase shadows, to misinterpret truth, and to inflate their own importance while shrinking their perspective. Their obsession didn't make them clever. It made them blind. It didn't make them disciplined. It made them desperate. While you walked away stronger, they walked further into frustration, anger, and a profound sense of wasted time. The irony is brutal because it flips the roles of power. For 8 years, they thought they held the leverage, that their scrutiny and persistence could bend reality to their will. Yet in truth, the experience only strengthened you. You emerged untouched by their obsession, uncorrupted by their projections, and equipped with an unshakable understanding of your own worth. They, on the other hand, emerged burdened, hollow, and aware of the years they'll never get back. Their punishment was never legal or social. It was internal, existential. This final irony reveals the hidden truth about human struggle. Strength is often forged in the furnace of unfairness, while weakness grows quietly in the soil of misdirected energy. You were honed by pressure they created, while they were corroded by the very obsession they cultivated. In the end, the story isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about who walked away intact and who carried the weight of mistakes that were entirely their own. The story of being hunted for something you never did is more than just a tale of injustice. It's a lesson in human nature, obsession, and the quiet power of resilience. 8 years of scrutiny, suspicion, and relentless pursuit revealed far more about the hunters than the hunted. They projected their fears, insecurities, and need for control onto someone else, hoping to manufacture guilt that didn't exist. They mistook strength for arrogance, persistence for truth, and obsession for discipline. Meanwhile, the person at the center of it all quietly endured, grew stronger, and emerged unshaken, carrying nothing but lessons and resilience. Every step of this relentless chase highlights the ironies of human behavior. The hunters spent years creating suffering and tension, only to find themselves burdened by regret, embarrassment, and wasted time. You, the innocent, walked away intact, calm, and empowered. The truth has a way of exposing what obsession cannot see, that attempting to control or define another person rarely works, and in doing so, the observer often becomes the victim of their own inability to confront reality. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a roadmap for understanding the subtle ways people project, obsess, and misdirect their energy. It's a reminder that resilience, clarity, and self-trust are far stronger shields than any reaction or defense could ever be. And ultimately, it proves one timeless truth. The person who remains grounded, calm, and self-aware will always outlast those who are consumed by fear, pride, or obsession. If you found this perspective eye-opening and want more deep dives into human behavior, life lessons, and stories that challenge the way we see the world, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going and uncover the truths most people miss. Stay blessed always.